All right, Shabbosai, good morning, good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. And Baruch Hashem, there are many of them. Thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Tammuz, Reb Naftali Tilson of Telmond, Eretz Yisrael, for dedicating the Sherman Joshua this month. In commemoration of the yard sites of his parents, Rabbi Yona ben Avram Leib and Rivka Bas Yaakov. We hope to the merit of our Talmud Torah. Ben Neshamas Lahavan Aliyah and the families in Nechama. And of course, in the schus of Rav Naftali and the entire Shem Meretz Hashem being Zocha to finish Shas B'Sha'a Tova U'Mitzlachos. To thank our week of learning sponsors, Rabbi Yomi Fleischman, for dedicating the Shiurim this week in memory of his father, Rabbi Shmuel Yudel ben Binyamin Yaakov, Yehuda and Jenny Goodhart, Le'ilei Nishmas Yishaya Zalman ben Laser, and Leah Soul in honor of Avram Silber and Zisi Frankel's upcoming marriage. Mazel Tov, all of the Neshama Shav and Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and the Chassan and Kalab Bizuach to all the Bayis Neman B'Yisrael. Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today, David Schwartz, Shkoyach and a Mazel Tov to Reb Tzvi Friedman today on the occasion which marks Reb Tzvi's first anniversary of beginning Daf Yomi. Wow, absolutely beautiful. Meretz Hashem. We should all be zocha to learn together for many years to come and celebrate many beautiful anniversaries of Torah accomplishment. Shkoyach. I will say also it goes without saying we dedicate our learning today to the four precious neshamas killed in the terror attack in Eretz Yisrael 2 days ago: Harel Masud, Elisha Enterman, Ofer Feierman, and Nachman Mordov. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, that the neshamas will have an aliyah, the families in Nechama and Halavaya Kodesh Baruch Hu will finally bring the day. Hashem Dima Mi Al Kol Panim, that Kodesh Baruch Hu should just wipe away our tears. Such barbaric and senseless acts of violence should Meretz Hashem cease in our people. Should be Zocha Meretz Hashem to live in our land with eternal shalom. We'll say with that, let us begin. Today's daf is Lamed Zayin 37, and we are picking up Meretz Hashem on Lamed Vav Amud Beis. We have a really great sugya today ahead of us. More pruzbol. All the pruzbol you could possibly want in one morning, and also we're going to get into some interesting inyanim with Shemitah as well. So I will say, we left off yesterday. Rav Nachman, right? Rav Nachman or Kaimena, or earlier up. Where did we leave off? Tashma, Damar Shmuel. Okay, perfect. So Tashma Damar Shmuel, thank you. So we'll say that is 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, about 20 lines from the bottom. So Tashma Damar Shmuel. Ha pruzbala ulbina dedaini. Pruzbal is an ulbina dedaini. What's an ulbina? Rashi says over here, a chutzbah. A chutzbah, right? In other words, so I'll say Shmuel come out on record as saying that pruzbal is a terrible thing. It's a chutzbah of the dayanim. Right now, why is it a chutzpah of the dayanim? Because essentially the dayanim are taking money inappropriately. Now, I will say taking money, they're telling the borrower not to repay. It's true, but by telling the borrower not to repay, what are you doing? You're effectively taking money from the lender, right? In other words, you're telling the borrower doesn't have to repay, so therefore, again, you're taking money that technically, biblically, the lender is entitled to, and you're removing it from him. So Shmuel says it's an ulbana. If I had the power, I would be mavatalit. Well, I'd be mavatalit. Avatline, you'd be mavatalit. But we already established in yesterday's daf that the only way for one Beis Din to overturn the rulings of another Beis Din is if that second Beis Din is at least as big in number and wisdom as the original legislating Beis Din. So how could Shmuel say that he would overturn it? This is what it means. What Shmuel was saying was, if I was able to convene a Beis Din that was larger in wisdom and number than Hillel's, I would overturn it. Now, as Shabbos say, the rest of the sentence is, but I can't. So what he's doing is he's expressing his displeasure with the concept of pruzbal, articulating the fact that if he could overturn it, he would overturn it, but he can't. Good. So the Gemara goes right. Rav Nachman Amar Akaimena. Rav Nachman said, if it was up to me, I would establish pruzbal. Establish akamena hamakayim b'kayim. It's established. He already made it. To which the Gemara says, Hagi Kamar, Ema Bei Milsa, Ta'afagav the low kasav kikasav dami. So what Rav Nachman was saying was, I am such a proponent of prosbol that what I would legislate was as follows: that even if a person didn't write a prosbol, it's as if they wrote a prosbol. That I will say, we see concepts like this. Where else do we see a concept like this? Ksuva is a good example like this. But let's say again, in all of the bahala, and all the hecticness of a wedding, it turns out, right, they're reviewing the pictures after the chasana, and what happened? They forgot to write a ksuva. Could happen, right? They forgot to write a ksuva. So we'll say, what's the halacha? The halacha is chas is all proud of himself. Look at this, right? I got into marriage. I don't have a ksuva. Right? You tell him, calm down. Yes, you do have a ksuva. Right? Why I will say? Because ksuva ultimately, again, is an obligation that is baked into the fabric of marriage. In other words, if you have a document, great. But even without a document, the obligation still remains. So it appears that what Rav Nachman is really saying is like this. I think prosbol is such an important thing that to me, I would kind of make it a standard issue procedure. That if you have an outstanding debt, effectively debts are automatically handed over to Beis Din for the Shemitah year. Right? Even if he didn't write it up, the prosbol still works. Which the Gemara says, so I'll say now we're going back to the statement of Shmuel, right? Shmuel said that this prosbol is an ulbina dedaini. So Gemara says, let's talk about this word. Does ulbina mean chutzpah? That literally, again, prosbol is like a chutzpah for the dayanim to do this? O lishna dinichusahu. Or I will say maybe ulbina is a lashon of nichusa. Nichusa means doing a favor or making it easy. See, I will say this is actually very interesting. The other possibility is, if you think about this like from a procedural perspective, prosbol makes the life of Beis Din much easier. I will say, what would happen if there wasn't prosbol? What would happen if there wasn't prosbol? In the time leading up to Shemitah, right, what would occur? The courtrooms would be packed with lenders trying to go ahead and collect from borrowers. I will say, now the truth is just you should be aware, when Shemitah cancels debts when? It's at the end of the Shemitah year. So we have this image that everything has to get done before Shemitah. In fact, again, it's really by the end of Shemitah. But again, we'll see that detail later on. So I'll say maybe ulbana means nichusa. Maybe ulbana means that prosbol did Beis Din an incredible favor. Because now with prosbol, what happens? Everybody's just signing the documents, submitting the documents to Beis Din, and Beis Din doesn't have to be on top of a whole bunch of collection cases. So it says, Tashma, Ula said, Aluva kala shazinsa v'karech pasa. Right? Literally again, aluva, terrible or chutzpahdik, is a kala who ultimately commits adultery in the midst of her chuppah. Meaning what I was saying, adultery obviously is always bad. But Lamaisa, there's a special egregious kite that exists when it's done under the chuppah at the time that the marriage itself is being formed. And I will say, Rashi points out over here that this is a reference to Chet HaEgel, to the sin of the golden calf. Right? We built the golden calf, literally we're at Har Sinai. Har Sinai is the chuppah with the Ribono Shel Olam. And literally in the middle of the chuppah, what do we do? We build this alien identity, right? We built, whether it's avodas or whatever it was, it was a terrible relationship trespass. So ultimately, again, disgusting or chutzpahdik is the kala who commits adultery in the midst of her chuppah. So we'll say, see the lashon of aluva means chutzpah. Amar Amari Brei Shmuel, my crow, what's the pasuk that supports this? Ad shamelech b'mesibo nadri nasan recho. Fine. Amar Rava, adayin chavivusahu gaban d'chsiv nasan v'lo ksiv hisriach. So we'll say the Gemara just points out, says on the side. So the pasuk that the Gemara is quoting over here is the pasuk from Shir Hashem. Ad shamelech b'mesibo nidri nasan recho. While the king is still ultimately again at the wedding party, nidri nasan recho. Literally again, the beloved has shared her scent. The idea being that while they're still at the wedding party, the kala has committed adultery. A reference to Chet HaEgel. The Gemara says, despite just an aside, despite that incredible relationship trespass, ultimately, again, HaKadosh Baruch Hu still loves us. Adayin chavivusahu gaban. His love or his desire still exists by us. Tichsev nasan velo ksiv hisriach, because it says nasan recho. Literally, again, he gave away the scent, and it didn't say it's spoiled. It say just as a beautiful aside that you see the strength of the relationship between HaKadosh Baruch Hu and Klal Yisrael. That even in the midst of overwhelming relationship trauma, like the Chet HaEgel, the love that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has for us still remains intact. It doesn't mean that it's not tarnished, and it doesn't mean that it's not damaged. It is. It is, like any relationship. But Lamaisa, it still remains with all of the relationship trauma. Incredible. Tan Rabbanon. We'll say another rayat. This is actually an incredible Gemara. Hane'alavan ve'enon ulvin. We'll say those who are disparaged, ultimately again, but do not respond in kind. Shomin cherpasan ve'inon mashivin. Ultimately, again, they hear their degradation and they do not respond. Osin me'ava, they serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu with love. Usmeichin v'yisurin, and they're able to rejoice in the challenges. Alein HaKasuf Omer, about such individuals, the pasuk says, Va'o'avav kitseis hashemesh bigvuraso. Those who love HaKadosh Baruch Hu are literally, again, are as radiant as the sun is when it rises. So I will say, the reason the Gemara is bringing down this pasuk is, remember, what are we asking? Shmuel said that Pruzbal is an ulbana dedaini. Right? Ulbana is an interesting word. We never heard it before. So Gemara says, what does it mean? What does it mean? So the Gemara itself floated two possibilities. Possibility one is it means chutzpah. Possibility two means it means nichusa. Right? Actually, a favor, something good. The Gemara is just bringing proofs that ulbana means chutzpah. Ulbana means chutzpah. Shmuel going on record very much against the concept of pruzbal. Now I will say, this Gemara over here, we actually had this Gemara before. This Gemara is absolutely striking and beautiful. So I will say, just to understand, what is the Gemara describing over here? The Gemara is describing those who are most beloved. Ohavav. Those who love HaKadosh Baruch Hu are radiant like the sun when it rises. Now I will say, what are the qualities of one who loves HaKadosh Baruch Hu? So I will say, look at it, it's incredible. The pasuk doesn't talk about how much Torah you learn, right? The pasuk doesn't talk about, again, how many mitzvos you do, or well, that it does. But what does it talk about first? Those who are able to exhibit inner strength and not respond when mistreated. Hane'elavan ve'enon ulvin. So we'll say, you're disparaged and you don't respond in kind. Shomin cherpasan ve'enon mashivin. Someone's degrading you and you don't respond. We'll say the inner strength it takes not to get into the mud, right? The inner strength it takes not to, we'll say, we all know, we've all been on this. Someone says something and you're like, oh my gosh, I am about to like verbally decapitate you, right? I have something so much better that is going to mamish like clip your wings. I will say the ability to exercise restraint and say, you know what? Why should I do that? Why should I get into the mud? Why should I respond in kind? Why should I sully my neshama? The ability to exhibit that internal strength is one of the greatest midos a Jew could possess. We'll say we see this in Pirkei Avos as well. Eizehu gibor, who is strong? Hakovesh es yitzro. Now I will say, literally translated means he conquers his inclinations. So we often think that this refers to taiva, to desire, right? A person has a desire to do something, and we think often like desires in the realm of the illicit or immoral. That's true. But there's a yetzer, I will say, sometimes when someone does something to me, there's a very strong yetzer hara to respond in kind. A person who goes ahead and restrains himself, exercises self-restraint, that is one of the greatest demonstrations of love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's next? Osin me'ava. Osin me'ava will say, a person could go ahead and be behaviorally proficient in so many ways, but yet there's no emotion, there's no love. The ability to infuse love into everything we do for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Smechin b'yisurin. It is easy to be in love with the Ribbon Shalom when life goes your way. Easy. We'll say, what do you do when life doesn't go your way? What do you do when you face adversity, when you face challenge? Is the relationship suddenly strained, or do you recognize that the same God who visits the brachas upon you is the same God who visits the challenges upon you? And if you love Him when He gives you the brachas, then find a way to love Him even when He gives you the challenges. A person who could combine all of these different midos, I will say, that is a person who truly loves HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Incredible. My prozbal, we'll say, what's a prozbal? Now what does a prozbal? What does the word mean? This is an etymological question. My prozbal, Amarav Chista Paros Buli Ubuti. So it means prus Buli Ubuti. Literally, again, a takana, a benefit for the buli and the booty. Who are the buli and the booty? Top of Lamed Zayin. Buli elu ashirim. Buli refer to the rich. Ichsiv v'shavarti es gon uschem. Tan Rav Yosef elu bulaos shebi Yehuda. Booty elu ha'aniyim. That refers to the poor. Ichsiv ha'avet ta'avitenu. We'll say again, talking about lending someone. So who are you lending to? If you're lending to someone who's impoverished. Siv Rabbi say, interestingly enough, so pruzbol is a contraction of really three words. Pruz, ultimately, again, is a takana, an enactment, and bul really is a contraction of two other words of buli and booty. This is something that benefits the rich and benefits the poor. So the Gemara goes weiter. So the Gemara says, good. So we'll say, so by the way, so I understand why it's a takana for the rich, right? Why is it a takana for the rich? Because they get their money back. Why is it a takana for the poor? So Rashi says, remember again, I will say, without pruzbal, what was happening? Remember, what prompted Hillel to make pruzbal? What prompted him? People weren't lending. So remember again, the fact that loans are still being made in close proximity to Shemitah, that's of benefit to the poor. So it is a takana that benefits the rich and the poor alike. So the Gemara goes weiter. Amali Rava loaza. So Rava said to a loaza means a person who spoke a foreign language, right? And ultimately, again, didn't speak Hebrew. So he asked this guy, my pruzbal, tell me, because we all use the word pruzbal, what does the word pruzbal mean in your language? Amalei, pursa de milsa. So this loaza said ultimately again, pursa de milsa, which means I will say a good takana. Pursa takana, right? Is a takana, right? An enactment. So again, we'll say according to the second version, pruzbal is just another word for an enactment. I'm Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Yisomim in Tzrichin pruzbal. So we'll say, so now let's get a little bit more into the mechanics. Orphans, this is very interesting. Orphans do not require pruzbal. We'll say, so what does this mean? If you can imagine the following situation, Ruvain has property, right? Ruvain makes a bunch of loans. Then what happens? Ruvain died. So now, of course, his children inherit his estate, and along with that, they inherit the loans that are due to him. Shemitah is now coming. So Rabbi Yehuda says, halacha l'maisa, orphans do not need to write out a pruzbal. Why not? Why? Because Rabbi Gamliel and his Beis Din, ultimately, I will say, they are the fathers of the Yisomim. I will say, what does this mean? Effectively, Beis Din has an obligation to always look out for, the community has an obligation to always look out for the Yisomim. Because I will say, often, especially when we're dealing with minor inheritors, or inheritors who are minors, right? So often, remember, they're just not conversant. They just don't know about the affairs of the estate. That's why we enact so many different pieces of legislation to protect them. We're doing this over and over to protect the Yisomim. So the Gemara says as follows. So the Gemara says one of the enactments was they don't have to go ahead and fill out a pruzbal because the Beis Din is like their politics. Look at Rashi. So we'll say it's as if already for the Yisomim, it's already as if their loans have been submitted to Beis Din. I will say, right, what does a pruzbal do? A pruzbal submits your loan to Beis Din. By Yisomim, it's as if their loans have already been submitted to Beis Din, because Beis Din helps them out. Good. So we'll say we are on Lamed Zayin Amud Aleph, 37a, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines, 10 lines down from the top. Tnan Hasam. Ain't kosim pruzbal, ella ala karka. Oh, very interesting. Let's say so that's some interesting qualifications. You can only write a pruzbal if the debt is backed by real property. Right? So only if you have a loan that is secured by real property can you write the pruzbal. Now, we'll say, now what's the pshat with this? Look at Rashi. Ela al karka, im yesh karka lelova, if the borrower has land, the lo tiknu ela bizman shachov kishar rov shtaros, she nigbim min karka, davi milsa de shchicha. So we'll say, now listen to this. The norm was that if I'm lending someone money, I will say, I want to know that that loan is backed up by some type of collateral. I would say the best kind of collateral, real estate, the best kind of collateral. So I will say the most common type of loan that was made was always a collateralized, a loan backed up by real property. I will say whenever Chazal make a takana, They make a takana that governs the normal set of circumstances. So since the normal set of circumstances is that when you're loaning money, you're only loaning to someone who could secure the debt with loan, even if the person is poor. Because remember again, even if a person is poor, right, bepashtos, they still have a house to live in. Right? If they have a house to live in, they have karka. If they have karka, there's something to secure the debt. So the Gemara says that having a loan secured by real property is what we call a milsa de shchicha. That's the norm. And Chazal only enacted their takanas in a normal situation. Therefore, the only time prusbal works is with a loan backed by karka. Incredible. So the Gemara says, he goes, so what happens? What happens if I lent Ruvain money and Ruvain doesn't have karka? No problem. What could I do? I could convey ownership of karka to him. For the purposes of prusbal, I can say, Ruvain, I'm conveying ownership of, Dalit Amis in my backyard to you. You are now the proud owner of Dalit Amis. And what that's enough to do is to make this now a loan that is secured by real property. I both say, there's a big chiddush in this. What's the big chiddush in this? The big chiddush is that generally the only time that real property secures a debt is when it was owned by the borrower at the time of the debt. Property that is acquired afterwards doesn't usually become encumbered by a pre-existing debt. The only example of this, the only exception to this we have in halacha is ksuva or prusbos, right? But ksuva, I will say again, ksuva is the only obligation that exists in halacha which encumbers every single piece of property you presently own and will ever own. Right? I feel the asil miknabe. Anything you will own becomes encumbered. So we'll say, so this is unique over here. Obviously, we'll say, because part of the takana of prusbal is we want to do whatever we can do to get it done because it's for the benefit of society. We want loans to be made. And the best way to ensure that loans will be made is if you go ahead and you secure the debts that the lenders will not lose their money over the course of Shemitah. So therefore, again, we're going to say the borrower needs to have land. But if he doesn't have land, the lender could go ahead and give him ownership of some small amount of land. How much land does he have to own? Kolshu, any amount. Literally, again, even the size of land, like a stalk of cabbage. In other words, I will say, literally, you just have to own a tiny piece of land. That's it. Then it's called a debt secured by real property. Then it's a milsa de shchicha, common occurrence. If it's a common occurrence, then it's covered by prusbal. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, afilu ishilu makom l'tanon l'kirayim kosana prusbal. Well, say not only that, even if the borrower doesn't own land, but what? He's borrowing land. That's enough real estate ownership to allow for prusbal. So we'll say, so for example, let's say I lend Reuben $1,000. Now Shemitah is coming. I want to write a prusbal. Reuben doesn't own any land. So we'll say, so what could I do? Right? The Gemara says, I can lend him some space in my backyard to put down his property. So I can say Reuben literally his stove is, Reuben, you could put your stove in my backyard. So the fact that he's allowed to use land, that's enough land ownership to allow for prusbal to occur. Ini is that so Vatani Hillel, ain't close in prusbal, Ela al Otzitz Nakov. We'll say the only thing you can write a prusbal on, listen to this, is if the borrower owned a perforated flower pot. And we'll say, what's the chap of the perforated flower pot? Is it's considered to be attached to the ground. So because it's attached to the ground, therefore it has the status of karka. So the Gemara says, Nakov in, shein or nakov low. But you can see over here, it's only a perforated flower pot, not a non-perforated flower pot. But why not? Amai, va'ika makomo. There's the place that the flower pot is sitting on, and that should be enough karka to allow for the writing of the prusbal. You don't know what's the case over here. The case is where the non-perforated flower pot is sitting on pegs. So because it's sitting on pegs, therefore again it's not occupying any part of the land, and therefore again it doesn't count. Ravashi maknile gidma de dikla the kasevale prusbal. Ravashi, when he lent someone money and Shemitah was coming and he wanted to write a prusbal, but the borrower didn't have any land, so Ravashi conveyed ownership to him of the stump of a palm tree. So I'll say, so again, something insignificant. Stump of a palm tree. Rabbanan debi Ravashi masrim ilayu la'adadi. We'll say the Rabbanan of the Shiva Ravashi, they would go ahead, masrim ilayu la'adadi means they would do a prusbal not in writing. not in writing. They would do a verbal prosbol. Rashi says over here, Masr milai below ksivas prosbol, elakach amar lechaverim hare atem bezin. So what's this is fascinating? They would essentially affect a verbal prosbol. So in other words, the same text, Hareni Mosrani Lachem, right? Dayonim, Kol Chov Sheyesh Li Etzli, whatever, right? Is yours, right? Egva Kolzman She'erza. So they would just go ahead and say it without writing it. Rabbi Yonasan Masra Milila Rabbi Chia Bar Abba. So Rabbi Yonasan also did Rabbi Chia Bar Abba. Amarlei Tzrichna Midiachrina. So again, after he gave it over to Rabbi Chia Bar Abba, he said, Rabbi, do I need anything else? Amarlei Lo Tzrichas. You don't need anything else. Well, so you see from this Gemara, that Allah Lamaisa, prosbol could even be done verbally. Really very interesting. Even without a document, you could go ahead and hand over your loans to Bezin and allow them to remain collectible. Tanrabanan. Listen to this case. Ein lo karka. All right, but let's get a little bit complicated over here. Because why not? Right, so listen to this. I lend Ruvain money. Ruvain has no real estate, but it happens to be that Shimon is guaranteeing the loan for Ruvain. Right? So I will say, so now, what's the halacha? So the Arev, the guarantor, has land, but the borrower does not. What's the halacha? Kosvin alav prosbol. You create a prosbol. Because since the guarantor has land, this is considered to be a loan that is backed by real property. Good. Lo, ula arev einlan karka, ula chayev yesh la karka. We'll say, what happens if the borrower doesn't have land, the guarantor doesn't have land, but the lender does have land? So what's the halacha? Kosvin alav prosbol. Ultimately, again, we could write a prosbol on that. Why mid Rabbi Nasan? Well, it's based on the statement of Rabbi Nasan. Rabbi Nasan, Omer, minay lenoshe bechaveiro mana. How do you know that if A lent B money, right? I'm sorry, minay lenoshe bechaveiro mana, bechaveiro, and B lent C money. Minay shemot C and mizem nosa. How do you know that A could collect directly from C? Tamulomar b'nasan la'asher ashamlo. Ultimately, I will say, because the pasuk says you will give to the one who he is obligated to. So I will say this is called in halacha shibuda d'Rab Nasan. Ultimately, I will say, so what you begin to see over here is that halacha l'maisa, there is a relationship that exists ultimately again between lender, borrower, and borrower two. So as long as someone in the chain ultimately has land, that is going to be enough to create prosbol. I will say, what you begin to see is as follows, which is very interesting. Pretty much, right, prosbol, we're going to relax every single standard we possibly can, right? Why? Tikkun ha'olam, right? Tikkun ha'olam. Both say, again, I want to pick up, this is not like, Tikkun ha'olam is a very misused word, right? And I should say misused. It's just been kind of like blown up to include anything and everything that's good. Which is good, beautiful. When Chazal used Tikkun ha'olam, they meant certain things that are necessary in order for society to function. So remember again, I was saying yesterday, Shir, loans have to be made. Right? You need people to lend money. You need people to lend money for charitable purposes. You need people to loan money for commercial purposes. And if the loan market shuts down, that stymies economic growth. And when economic growth is stymied, the community as a whole suffers. So that's why Hillel institutes prosbol. So that's why you see, it's almost like we're making excuses for it to work. Yeah. And I will say, remember, all of this operates. Why is all of this able to operate? Based on the concept that Shemitas Ksafim ultimately, again, is either D'Rabbanan, presently, or ultimately, again, that they're being Mavatla D'Oraisa, but it's B'Shevi Al Ta'asa. It's in a passive fashion, which Chazal have the ability to do. Okay, let's go weiter. So the Gemara goes weiter. The Gemara says, Shemitah cancels all debts. I would say whether again it's a debt recorded in a document or a verbal debt. Rav Shmuel Silber, Bishtar. When we talk about what does it mean a document, a loan recorded in a document? Bishtar sheyesh bo achrayis nechasim. When it says a shtar, we'll say shtar means a loan that is secured by real property. Shelo bishtar means shem bo achrayis nechasim. We'll say when it says a loan that's not made in a document, that doesn't mean a verbal loan. That just means a loan that's not backed up by real property. Kol shekim mil ba'alpeh. So Shemitah is going to go ahead and cancel a loan that's backed by real property, a loan that's not backed by real property, and certainly a verbal loan. Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, no. Bishtar, shtar she'en bo achrayis. Shtar means, I will say, means a document recorded, a loan recorded in a document that is not backed by real property, right? Shelo bishtar mil va'alpeh. Shel b'shtar ultimately means a verbal loan. Aval shtar sheyish bo achrayis nechasim eino mishamet. But I will say, if you have a loan that ultimately is backed by real property, Shemitah does not cancel that debt. So I will say, so this is now a major machlokes. And the machlokes essentially said this on the following idea. I know that Shemitah will go ahead and wipe out. So a loan that is not, by the way, leave principal on the side right now. Now we're just talking about just what Shemitah does to loans, leaving principal on the side. What does Shemitah do to loans? It cancels loans. What kind of loans does Shemitah cancel? Here's what we know. Shemitah will definitely cancel a verbal loan, right? Shemitah will also cancel a loan that is not backed by real property. Does Shemitah cancel a loan backed by real property? That's a machlokes. That's a machlokes. So Tanya Kava said Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Shimon Lakish. We have a brayso that supports Rabbi Yochanan and Lakish. Shtarchov mishamet. It's right if you have the yesh bo achrayis nechasim eino mishamet. Supposed to the brayso seems to say it explicitly. If you have a document that is recorded, if you have a loan that is recorded on a document but not backed by real property, Shemitah will cancel it. But if you have a loan backed by real property, Shemitah will not cancel that debt. Tanya idach another brayso. Bless you. Siem lo sada achas ba'ava also. Both say if let's say I lent Reuven money and Reuven identified. He says to me, if I don't repay you, you could collect that field. He identified the field. Eino mishamet. Ultimately, Shemitah will not cancel that debt. Why I both say? Because once again, this is a loan backed by real property, right? The Gemara says, "Tanya, not only that, but even if Reuven didn't identify a particular field, but what did he do? He pledged, he collateralized all of his assets. Shemitah will not cancel the debt. So I will say, what do you see from here? Shemitah only cancels verbal debts or unsecured debts. But if you have a debt that is secured by real property, ultimately Shemitah will not cancel that debt. Krive Rabbi Asi, so says this, a relative of Rabbi Asi, he had a loan document, and in the loan document, the loan was secured by real property. Okay, Rabbi Asi. He came before Rabbi Asi. Amarle mishamet or ina mishamet? Tell me, right? Does Shemitah cancel this debt or not? Amarle ina mishamet. So Rabbi Asi said, no, Shemitah does not cancel it because it's a secured debt. So I say, so what happened? Shaf gave Asi coming Rabbi Yochanan. So everybody has a relative like this, right? So what happened? So the relative, whatever, he didn't like Rabbi Asi, so he went to Rabbi Yochanan. Amarle mishamet. Rabbi Yochanan says, yes, Shemitah cancels the debt. Us, Rabbi Asi came to Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Asi came before Rabbi Yochanan. Amalei Meshamet, oh, Eina Meshamet. So let's listen to this. So Rabbi Asi came before Rabbi Yochanan. He says, tell me, does Shemitah cancel a secured debt or not? Amalei Meshamet. He said, no. He says, yes, it's Meshamet. V'ha marhu da amar Eina Meshamet. And ultimately, again, he said, but you are on record as saying that it doesn't cancel. Amalei v'chim ipnei shalom adam nasa ma'isa. Just because ultimately, again, what's interesting is just because something appears to be true, like in the theoretical, doesn't mean that that's practically how we operate. Amalei v'atanya kavase demar. I bet there's a brayso that supports you. Amarle Dilma Hahi Beis Shamahi the Amar Shtar Haomi Legavos Kigabos Dami. We'll say maybe that brayso that says that a secured debt is not a debt secured by real property is not canceled by Shemitah. Maybe that's reflective of Beis Shammai. We'll say Beis Shammai has an interesting position that Beis Shammai says that any document or any debt that is ready to be collected is as if it's already been collected. So therefore, if you have a loan that is secured by real property, so that means that there's a source of repayment that is already present. Beis Shammai would say it's as if that's already been collected. Then I will say, if it's as if it's already been collected, would Shemitah cancel such a debt? No, because Shemitah only cancels what? Outstanding debts, not collected debts. Incredible. So we'll say it's not hustle. We learn there. Hamavas chaver ma'os ala mashkon. If a person, lender lends borrower money and there's a collateral, or someone gives over the documents to Bezdin, in mishamtin, ultimately Shemitah doesn't cancel the debt. Bishlam ma'os shtaros of Bezdin the tafsilu beidina. I understand why if a person gives over their documents to Bezdin, why Shemitah doesn't cancel, because you're going to say that's effectively prusbal, right? It's effectively prusbal. It's no longer personally held debt. Ela malva ala mashkon my timer. But also, when a person lends on collateral, why wouldn't Shemitah cancel the debt? Amarava mishum de tafisle. Because we're talking about a situation where the lender is in possession of the collateral. So the Gemara says, Amar le Abaye ele me'ata, helva v'dar b'chaser detafisle, hachinami delo meshamit. Well, boss, what about the following case? What happens if I lend Reuven money and I live in Reuven's house? Right? So I'm living in the collateral, so to speak. So we're going to say, or again, I'm utilizing an asset. Would we say that Shemitah wouldn't cancel in that case? No, collateral is different. So why is collateral different? Because based on Rabbi Yitzchak, ultimately, again, a lender acquires collateral. How do I know that a lender acquires collateral? What that means is that there's quasi-ownership over collateral. So we'll say ultimately, it's talking about that if you, the lender, be giving collateral, and the borrower needs that collateral for his activities of daily living, let him use it. Let him use it, and it will be considered to be an act of tzedakah for you. Now, if the lender doesn't acquire the collateral, then what's the tzedakah in allowing the borrower to use it? Mikan lebalchov, balchov shekana mashkon. But say, what do you see from here? From here, you see that actually, again, a creditor actually does acquire to a certain degree a mashkon. I will say it's not full ownership, there are limitations, but there is a quasi ownership. So I will say what you begin to see is a fascinating theme, which is that what? Which is that halacha l'maisa. Here's what we know. Shemitah will go ahead and wipe out verbal debt. Shemitah will wipe out unsecured debt. The machlokes also we have to talk about is what does Shemitah do with secured debt? Now, secured debt could have one of three possibilities, right? Possibility one is that it's just a debt that is backed by real property. Possibility two is that it's a debt backed by specific real property. Possibility three is that it's debt secured by specific collateral. So what do you do in that type? So I'll say, so those cases are a little bit different because one could, so to speak, already identify a source of repayment. So do we say that since there is an existing source of repayment, therefore Shemitah will not cancel this debt because on some level it's as if what? It's as if what? To a certain extent, it's as if it's been repaid. Not literally, but a little bit, because since the source of repayment is clearly identified, it's as if it's been repaid, like Beis Shammai said, and therefore Shemitah won't cancel. So both say that's our outstanding question. So again, verbal debt we know it wipes out. Unsecured debt we know it wipes out. Secured debt either in the form again of real property, specific real property, or collateral, that still remains outstanding. Tanan Hasan. I will say we learned there. Amud Beis. Hamachzir chov lechaveira b'shiyah. So we'll say so again. We'll come to the Rambam. Ultimately again in these particular halachas. Let's just do a little bit more Gemara. So we'll say we're moving out now. Again, not prosbol, just basic Shemitah. And we'll say this is an incredible halacha. Hamachzir chov lechaveira b'shiyah. So we'll say now watch this. I lent Reuven $10,000. Okay. Reuven comes to me at the end of Shemitah, because at the end of Shemitah is when debts are wiped out. And Reuven says to me, "Here's your money. Here's your $10,000." I have to say to Reuven, it's okay. Mishamet ani. In other words, I'm canceling the debt. But if Reuven says, no, I would like to pay you, I'm allowed to accept the money. Right? So I will say, so listen to Rashi, look at Rashi just a moment. Hamachzir chov lechaver b'shvius, bizman shashvius no hegas, va'avra alav shvius, v'achar kach zero, v'lo shech zero b'shvius, atzma de'im kein lo havat tzarech l'meimar. So I will say, now listen to this. Rashi says, ein shvius mishametes ala b'sof. As I mentioned before. I will say, this is very important. The Shemitah year cancels debts at the end of the Shemitah year. So even when you look at the Psukim, it says Karva Shnas Hasheva. Sounds like Shemitah is Mishamet at the beginning of the year. No, Halacha Mai says Shemitah is Mishamet. Then what's that? That's where Makbet try Pruzbal's on Shemitah, right? The Pruzbal is often written on Shemitah itself before the close of the Shemitah year. So Rabbi will say, what's happening over here? Reuven's coming to me at the end of the Shemitah year, or really, Rashi says over here. He's talking about Shemitah. It's really after Shemitah. So the debt has effectively been canceled. Reuven wants to pay me the money. I say, Reuven, Mishamet Esani. I cancel the debt. Reuven says, I still want to pay you. I'm allowed to receive it. I both say, because effectively, what is Reuven giving me? A matana. It's effectively a gift. It's a gift. So because remember again, what you must pick up over here is the pasuk says v'zed dvar hashmita means that part of the cancellation of shmita debts is an articulation that the debt is canceled. So Reuven's coming to pay me. I say, Reuven, I am a mishamit. He says, no, I still want to pay you. I say, okay. Now I say, get ready for this. Amar Rabba v'talile ad amar hachi. But ultimately, I will say you're allowed to literally hang him up, string him up, right, until he agrees to give you the money. Now, I say, now, whoa, what just happened over here, right? A little 180. Well, say, look at Rashi. V'talile im hayarotz at lachzor bo yitlenu ala eitz im gadra yado o da'amar le'afal pikin. So we'll say, now listen to this. Listen to this. What this means is as follows, right? So we'll say, so halacha l'maisa, right? So. Yeah, let's look at Rashi once more. Rashi says, "V'talilei im hayarotz alachzor bo." So I'll say, so now here's the case. Here's the case. Reuven says, "I want to pay you back. Want to pay you back." I say that no, it's okay, and Reuven walks away. Reuven walks away. So now, what does the Gemara say? I could compel him to now pay me back. But 1 second, I just said a minute ago, I'm a shamet the debt. Right? So I'll say, here's what's interesting. We assume that people know how Shemitah works, right? And we assume that people understand that Shemitah cancels debts. When Reuven came to repay me, I would say, what was his ratzon? What was his ratzon? He wants to make good on the debt. He knows there's no debt. But Lamaisi, he understands he borrowed money from me. He wants to get back to me with Tras Matana. I say Mishametani. Right? It's okay, Mishamet. So I'll say, what happens now in Reuven's mind? He's like, Givaldik, you know what? I changed my mind. I'm not paying it back anymore. So Rabbi says, since we know that his real inner ratzon is to pay me back that money, I know that's his ratzon. Rabbi say, how do I know that that's his ratzon? How do I know it? Because he showed up. Rabbi say, remember again, does he have to show up at all? No. Rabbi say, I want to be clear. Shemitah cancels debts. Reuven has no obligation to show up to me at all. But instead he's showing up. And he says, I'd like to pay you back. We assume he knows that Shemitah cancels the debts. He coming, he wants to pay me back. I say, Mishametani. He begins to walk away. I could grab him by the collar. I'd give him a little noogie, whatever, and get him to go ahead and pay me back, right? Why? Because I will say we assume that his ratzon is to pay. I will say sometimes saving a little bit of money gets in the way of people doing the right thing. I will say, so therefore, again, this is one of these cases of kolfin oso achiomerot. I could use some level of physical compulsion to get him to pay me back the debt only because he expressed the interest to do so. In other words, I both say, when doesn't this work? Right? Let's just play out a different case. Reuven owes me money, $10,000. Shemitah comes, right? Debt is canceled. I see Reuven at the Kiddush. Could I put him on a headlock and say, you really want to pay me back? Right? No. Why? Because the Meister Shemitah canceled the debt. Right? That's it. Now I'm talking about this case is different because Reuven is approaching me. He's saying, I want to pay you back. I say my part, Shemitah cancels it. He walks away. Whoa, you came to me. The fact that you came to me indicates you want to go ahead and pay the debt. So therefore, again, I'm allowed to use force in order to get you to comply with your original desire. Incredible. So the Gemara says, "Eisvei abai kishu no lo." So I'll say when Reuven pays me back, al yomer lo b'chovi ani no lecha. He shouldn't say that he's paying me back my debt. El yomer lo shalihein u'b'matana ani no lecha. So Reuven should say, I know that I'm not obligated to pay you back, but I'm giving you a gift. It's important. We'll say in this exchange, it's important that it be acknowledged that this is not the repayment of a debt. Rather, this is the giving of a gift. Amarlei, talilei, nami ada amarachi. He says, you're right. When we coerce him not just to give back money, but we coerce him to what? To say that he's giving a gift. As well say, you have these examples in halacha of where you could force a person to do something because you understand that deep down, their will is to do the right thing. I both say, what is the right thing when you borrow money and Shemitah cancels that debt? What is the right thing to do? What's the right thing to do? To give it back as a gift. Not to, again, we have to be careful with our lashon. Not to pay it back, because the Torah says you have no obligation to pay it back. But the right thing to do is to give a gift. That's the right thing to do. So again, I would say, do we force people to do the right thing? Do we force people to do the right thing? Generally, no. But if you of your own volition have come forward to do the right thing, and now you're backtracking from doing the right thing, we're going to force you to do the right thing. So that's this case over. Again, I want to be clear. If Reuven never shows up, we're letting it go. But if Reuven shows up, says, I'd like to give you a gift, and then he backs out of it, that's when we could use some level of physical force to compel him to comply with his original desire to do the right thing. Incredible. So then goes weiter. So Abba Bar Marta, Abba Bar Minyumi, listen to this. Abba Bar Marta, who was Abba Bar Minyumi, Masik Bey Rabba Zuzi. Ultimately, again, Rabba lent him money. So we'll say, so Rabba lent Abba Bar Marta money. I soon in the Hile B'Shviyah. So we'll say, so what happened? Abba Bar Marta brought the money to repay Rabba during the Shemitah year, or after the Shemitah year. And Rabba said to him, Amar le Mishamei Tani. Rabba says, it's Shemitah, I cancel the debt. Shaklinu v'azal. So Abba Bar Marta is all happy. What does he do? He takes the money and he leaves. Okay, so the Gemara says, Asa Abai Ashkechei Dahava Atziv. Abai found Rabba, and Rabba was very distressed. Rabbi say he was just out all of this money. Amalei, Amai Atzivmar. So Abai says, Rabba, why are you all upset? Amalei Hachi Ava Maisa. So he told Abai the Maisa. So Azal Gabe. So ultimately, again, Abai goes to Abba Marmarta. Amalei, Amtas Le Zuze Lamar. Tell me, did you try? So again, Abai says to Abba Marmarta, did you offer to give a gift to Rabba in the form of in the amount of the loan? Amalei in. Abba Marmarta said, yeah, of course I tried. What did Rabba say to you? Rabba said, no, thank you. No, thank you. Rabba say again, four of the most important words. Af al pi kain. Did you say, nevertheless, I'd like to give you the debt. I'd like to give you the money. Not give you the debt. I'd like to give you a matana. Amarle lo. He said no. He said no. Amarle vi amritle af al pi kain. Hava shaklinu minach. So Abai says to Abba Marmarta, so I'll tell you, had you said Afal Pikain, Rabba would have accepted the money back. Hashta mihas asmanin lehela ve'emalei. Afal Pikain. So Abai says to Abba Marmarta, if you want my opinion, which you're not asking for, but I'm giving it to you anyway, right? Go back to Rabba. Say Afal Pikain, offer to pay him back. He's going to tell you, Mishamei Tani, you need to say to him, Afal Pikain, and you're going to see he's going to accept the money. Azal Atminu Nehile Abba Marmarta, to his credit, went back to Rabba. V'Amar, right? He offered to pay him the money. Rabba said, Mishamei Tani, Abba Marmarta said, Afal Pikain, I still want to pay you. And what happens? Shaklinhu Milei. Ultimately, again, Rabba accepted the money. Amar lohava beidaita b'hitzur mirabana meikara. And let's say, Abaye said essentially, but Abba Marmarta, this Talmid Chacham did not have enough common sense to begin with. In other words, we'll say, a little bit of a knock on Abba Marmarta. Abba Marmarta should have known that you're supposed to say Afal Pikain. I will say it's such an incredible idea. Also, that sometimes when you want to do something for someone, that but sometimes they may refuse the request. I will say sometimes people refuse the request for a variety of different reasons. Sometimes when you know that this is something beautiful for the individual, and you know that you have an absolute desire to help, what do you have to do? Afal Pikain. Sometimes you have to be a little bit persistent in trying to help the other, because often people are just reticent to accept help. But if you push a little bit harder, sometimes after they refuse, and I'll say no, sometimes, right, you offer someone something, they say no, and you're like, okay, and if you would have just pushed a little bit harder in a nicer way, there would have been the opportunity to do something really special for that individual. This happens all the time in marriage, right? Where a person offers help to a spouse says, no, thank you. And especially the husband's like, oh yeah, right, perfect, right? I was Yotzei check, right? I even offered, and I don't even have to do anything. I look great, and absolutely no work to be done. Meanwhile, you don't even realize how much trouble you're in, right? Because why? Because the right thing to do was to say, no, I understand I don't have to. I want to. Afal Pikain, Rabbi say, sometimes says that in life, even if you don't have to, sometimes the best thing you could express is, I want to. I know you don't need it, but I want to do this. Sometimes that's ultimately, again, the necessary step to truly growing our life relationships. The Gemara goes weiter. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Al Nachman, Neman Adam Lomar, Pruzbal Hali Biyad, Divide Avan Mimenu. A person is believed to say, I had a pruzbal, and it was lost. My time, what's the reason? Because we'll say there's no reason to think that a person is lying about prosbol. Since Chazal instituted a prosbol, since a prosbol is easy, we believe a person to say that they had a prosbol and they lost it. So we'll say when a situation like this used to come before Rav, they would ask the person, tell me, did you have a prosbol, maybe you lost it? So we'll say sometimes the pasuk says sometimes you have to open up the mouth for the person who is mute. Tanan. So too, again, if a lender produces a loan document and he doesn't have a prosbol, ultimately, again, you can't collect without a prosbol. So tonight, so it's machlokes the sanya hamotzi shtarchov tzarech she'imo prosbol. The chum omrim eno tzarech. So we'll say it's a fundamental machlokes. So we'll say, do we assume that every transaction had a prosbol, but it was lost or not? So I'll say ultimately again there's a machlokes. So we have to stop over here for today. The one major piece we have outstanding in the halacha l'maaseh, we'll say is does a prosbol meshamit? Does a prosbol cancel a secured debt, either by a debt that ultimately again has specific collateral, general land, or ultimately again we'll call it specific land, general real property, or specific collateral. And we'll see that in Rambam tomorrow. Shkoyach. All right, Chevron Zoom, have a great day, everyone.
The whole topic of it's discussing that point. That the whole was actually enacted when Carter was backing up.
Say that again.